I had this interesting experience. It was a couple weeks ago. This doesn't happen very often, but they were doing there was a group, we're all together, and they were doing these icebreakers, those very uncomfortable things that people make you do. And they asked questions like, how many of you have left the country in the last 6 months or a year? And I'd left the country. And so you all had to go to one side if you had, and the other side were for those who hadn't. So I went to the side who had, and someone asked me, where did you go? And I couldn't remember. It wasn't selective amnesia. I don't have Post-it notes all over my house reminding me who I am and who my kids are, but I honestly could not remember where in the States I had gone. But I know I went. I went with people, so I have very credible witnesses that I went to the States. I remember this excellent pizza I ate while I was there. I remember the conference I went to. And I went through my Google Photos, and I know that I was in the States, but I honestly, to this day, can't remember exactly where it was in the States. Terrible. And it's because it was one of those trips where I didn't actually really have to do a lot of work to get there. There's someone else who understood what was needed, and they were able to make a way. So I literally had someone pick me up from my house and bring me to the airport. I had to be on time, I had to bring my passport, do all those things, but throughout the entire process, someone had taken care of all the details for me, and no word of a lie, up until the day I saw my ticket, I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I was going somewhere, and I was supposed to be there. And someone else had arranged the hotel, someone else had arranged the Ubers that we used while we were there, and someone had arranged our flights back. It was so nice as an adult to have someone know what needed to be done and make a way for me to really just sit back, relax, and enjoy the trip. And I gotta ask you, adults, when was the last time that's happened for you? Some of the kids in the room are like, well, this morning. My clothes were laid out, they put food in my mouth, hardly, and then, got me out the door to church. But how many of you have had an experience? When was the last time you felt that you didn't have to worry about details? You were able to kind of just go, someone understood what you needed, and they made a way for you, and so you can kind of just, without anxiety, just kind of rest and go about the motions. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But instead, many of you get yourself ready in the morning, not well, but you get yourself ready in the morning. Some of you have to get kids ready in the morning. You got to get out the door. You got to make sure everything's arranged. It's been a long time, but it would be really nice if someone did that, especially when life gets really difficult. In those pain points of life where you feel betrayed. Maybe when life takes some strips off of you and you have this lack of peace. Maybe it's when things don't go your way. Maybe it's when someone has lied to you. Maybe it's when you are kind of racked with guilt and shame and the heaviness of maybe actions or words you said or maybe didn't say. It would be kind of nice if we had someone who was able to come alongside to understand what we need and make a way through it. But sometimes it's hard to experience that. As you get older, you recognize life comes and it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't ask you when to stop. It doesn't ask you how far to go. It just kind of overwhelms. And it would be nice, like I said, if someone understood what we needed and was able to make a way through it. Those things and that kind of help is far and few in between. We come to Good Easter this morning. And there's a lot of different ways you can come to Good Easter. There's a lot of ways that you can understand Good Easter. In fact, every year I kind of pray, Lord, what do you want to show me this year as we go to Easter weekend? As I experience Good Friday as a believer, but also, of course, experiencing Good Friday as a pastor and as a shepherd and with the church. And this year it was a little different for me. Because as I reflected on Christ, on all that he endured and all that he went through, I felt like the Lord was showing me that he didn't do it in weakness, but he did it in incredible strength because he endured all the things he did, all the pain, all the trial, but he won in the end. He didn't succumb to it. It didn't destroy him. In fact, spoiler alert, death didn't win. He endured everything he went through, not in weakness, but he did it in strength. So much so that not even death could hold him down. And I was reflecting, I was like, the reality is this. Jesus is no longer in Good Friday. You know that, right? We come to the table reflecting on a Christ who endured 2,000 years ago this suffering and the cross, but he won. He's on the other side of Good Friday. We know Easter's coming. We know he resurrected. We know we have life through him. Jesus is not in Good Friday. He's beyond Good Friday. And I thought, Lord, why this? And I felt like he was telling me because many of us, in fact, all of us, and hear me out when I say this. All of us are kind of still living in kind of our own Good Friday. No, we're not making amends for the world's sin. I'm not calling you Jesus. But what we're in is the reality of life that we are still afflicted, aren't we? Many of us do feel the sting of betrayal. Many of us, through time, maybe you're mourning, maybe you're facing circumstances, you're facing hurt. Some of you got a prognosis, and it is not bringing joy. Some of you, peace is being crushed, joy is being crushed. Some of us are facing literal death. Some of us are facing the weight of our own sin and crushed by it, that separation that we're feeling, whether it's guilt or shame. Some of us are in circumstances or moments we thought, I never expected my life to look this way. Some of us are in this place of right now, waiting for what God has for us later. We're living in this kind of Good Friday. We're in the now, but not yet. But the message for me, the message for us this morning, is that Christ endured the cross so we would know that he's present in our Good Friday. And this is what I mean by it. I think one of the reasons why we see and why we come, why it's so important that we reflect on all that Christ went through, is because I think one of the things it tells us right off the bat is this, is that he is a God that as you traverse life, knows and understands what you need, doesn't he? I mean, think about it. You think about all the different stages as his walk. You think about he's eating dinner with his friends, the disciples, the followers, his closest 12. They spent 3 years. He calls them out, come follow me. They spend life. They watch his miraculous life. They listen to his words. They experience transformation. They see transformation. And they're sitting at a table, and Jesus, as he's sitting with his friends, knows he's going to not just be betrayed by one of them, but will be abandoned by all of them. He knows abandonment. He's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he asks his friends, would you mind staying up and praying with me? And what do? They all sleep. That's why I say if you're looking at your devotional time while you're laying in bed, you're not as good as the disciples. You're probably going to fall asleep. They abandon him. You have Peter who denies him, even though he says, I will never deny. We have Peter who denies him, so he knows being denied. We have him at the trial, and he's being tortured. And I won't go into specifics, but he's being whipped with something that is meant to get a human to the point of not just wanting death, but praying for death. They have this pain scale that they have for humans, and whereas maybe stepping on a Lego piece in the middle of the night is at about a 6 or a 7, they say that what Jesus experienced is beyond the scale, but he also felt that for hours on end, as his body was being scourged, ripped apart, with a crown of thorns pressed on his head. And not just that, constantly mocked, misunderstood, facing injustice. And then he's forced to walk half a kilometer, and that doesn't maybe seem very far. Some of you are like, well, we walk that every day. But think about being scourged to the point of death. And they say the cross would have been about 300 pounds. That even if it was just the cross beam, that would have been somewhere around the 100 pounds. After you have been tortured for hours, to drag this heavy cross for half a kilometer up a hill to your own death. He mourned as he was on the cross and saw his mother and saw his friends that he'll be separated from. As sin was laid on his shoulders, he sensed the cosmic separation, the greatest kind of separation anyone can sense, having the full weight of sin on his shoulder. I mean, we have, as the writer of Hebrews tells us, we have a high priest who is able to empathize with our weaknesses. We have someone who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet it says he did not sin. It says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, listen to this, so we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Now, the idea of a high priest is this, is what happened is a high priest would take the prayers of the people and they'd be like a mediator and they would bring it to God. And what he's saying here is that we have Christ who removes the separation, but he not just understands what you and I need, he actually endured all of those things. And he sits at the right hand of God, and he is for you. He's present in your time of need. You know, there's a difference between someone who watches and who's able to say, oh man, that's terrible, and someone who has gone through the same suffering and then is able to be intimately aware, to know what you and I need, and to minister to our wounds. That's the first thing we understand about Good Friday, about this pain, is that we have a Christ who endured it and won to remind us that he understands and he knows what you need as you face life, face affliction. But the second thing it reminds us and it tells us is not only does he understand and knows what we need, secondly, that he made a way through it so that we can rest. I mean, if you think about anyone who could have lost hope, could have lost peace, who could have lost joy, who could have lost themselves, could have allowed, themselves to kind of just despair and lose their strength, it would have been Christ. It would have been him. Because under the weight of all that, any single one of us probably would get to the point where we would be crushed. And maybe you say you can get through some of this, but when it comes to that cosmic separation between you and God, when it comes to actual physical death, you and I would be crushed under the weight of death. It's very hard to live without hope, without peace, to live in despair of our present and our future, to be misunderstood, to see injustice happen or happen to you. It would crush us. But what if I told you that is exactly why Jesus went through it? He knew you and I would be crushed by it. And instead, he won so that he can make a way through. And the invitation is for you and I to know a God who says, listen, when you are in despair, in your weakness, allow me to come in and provide hope. Listen, I know that you are facing something and it's hard to find a sense of peace with God when you're crushed by your sin or you're weighed down with shame and guilt. And yet we have a Christ whose body was crushed, body was open, and what he bled was peace for you, between you and God. We have a Christ who understands that in your affliction, you can have joy. In your despair, you can have hope. Justice and injustice. When you feel lonely, he becomes a friend. When you're abandoned, he becomes present. When you are weak, it's where he becomes strong. And this was alluded to throughout Scripture. I mean, in Isaiah, which is if you're unfamiliar with the Bible, in the Old Testament, speaking of this Messiah of Jesus, says this, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for your iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds, you are healed. Jesus, speaking earlier in his life, in fact, he had this invitation, and he says this, he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you more to be worried about. No. And I will give you rest. What is making you weary? What are you burdened by? He will give you rest. Paul writes the majority of the New Testament. He writes to the church in Corinth, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Where are you weak? Where do you need him to be strong? Our God endured not in weakness, but in strength, and not even death could hold him down. Why? Because he loved you. Because he loves you and me. You know, a couple months ago, I heard someone say this, and maybe you've heard me say it, but I've repeated it a few times in different circumstances because it's just stuck with me. And it was very simple. They said, nowhere in the Bible are you called anything other than a child of God. You're not an adult of God, a grandfather of God. You and I are always children of God. And what we have here is his strength as he endured and won was the ultimate show of his incredible love for you and for me. So yes, we take time, we reflect on what pinned him to the cross. But what if I told you what really, really pinned him there was not so that you and I can feel the full weight of our guilt and shame. It's so that we can feel the burden come off and know his rest. We do have someone who knows and understands what you went through, and who also makes a way for you and me.